Switzerland shouldn't exist, and we're not like this. No coastline, no empire, no natural resources, just mountains. And yet it became one of the richest countries in the world. How? It started 700 years ago, not with a war, but with a promise. 3 men, meeting in secret, made a pact that would defy geography, power, and logic. And what happened next changed Europe forever. It was the year 1291. 3 men from 3 different valleys stood in a meadow surrounded by mountains. They weren't kings, they weren't soldiers, they were local leaders, and they were tired of outside rule. At the time, the region that would become Switzerland was a loose patchwork of alpine communities. No unifying language, no central government, no military power, just villages caught between empires. To survive, they formed an alliance, not to conquer, but to protect each other, a defensive pact, sworn with no bloodshed, no crowns, no fanfare. It was called the Eternal Alliance. And while Europe was tearing itself apart through feudal wars and dynastic claims, this mountain alliance quietly took root. By 1315, that peace was tested. The Austrian Habsburgs, one of Europe's rising powers, invaded. They were well-armed, trained, and confident. The Swiss? Mostly farmers and herdsmen with basic weapons, but they had the terrain and something to prove. At a narrow pass between 2 lakes, the Swiss set an ambush. It was brutal. They slaughtered 500 Austrian soldiers. Some fled, others drowned. None expected that kind of resistance. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a message. The Swiss might be small, but they wouldn't be easy to conquer. From that moment, the alliance grew. Lucerne joined, then Zurich, then Bern. It wasn't a country, it was a network, bonded by mutual defense, not ambition. And over the next 2 centuries, that bond would be tested again and again as the Swiss began to take on the giants of Europe. By the early 1500s, the Swiss had earned a fearsome reputation. They weren't just defending anymore. They were expanding, city by city, battle by battle. Their confederation was growing stronger. They pushed into northern Italy. 25,000 Swiss troops advanced south, capturing towns, overwhelming resistance. They even took Milan from the French. It looked like nothing could stop them. But in 1515, that changed. In a small village called Marignano, the French launched a powerful counterattack. The Swiss lines collapsed. They suffered a crushing defeat, and then something unexpected happened. Instead of regrouping for revenge, they stopped. They returned Milan to the French and chose peace. That single decision marked a turning point. It was the beginning of Swiss neutrality. They stepped back from conquest, but not from war. Instead of fighting for territory, they started renting out their skills. Swiss soldiers became Europe's most sought-after mercenaries, but they weren't just hired muscle. They arrived as full units, disciplined, organized, and deadly. Kings and emperors paid handsomely for Swiss battalions, and sometimes opposing sides would each have Swiss soldiers in their ranks, fighting each other. This strange chapter lasted for centuries, until the mid-1800s, when Swiss mercenary forces were officially banned, all except one, the Vatican's Swiss Guard. But while their soldiers fought abroad, the country stayed still, quiet, neutral, and that neutrality was about to become Switzerland's most valuable asset. In 1798, neutrality wasn't enough. Napoleon's forces invaded Switzerland, dissolved the old confederation, and imposed a new order, the Helvetic Republic, a centralized government under French control. It didn't last. Just 5 years later, the Republic collapsed. The Swiss didn't want a centralized state. They wanted their cantons, semi-independent, self-governing, deeply local. Napoleon backed off, but the invasion left a mark. When Napoleon fell in 1815, The European powers met at the Congress of Vienna to redraw the map of Europe. Switzerland asked for one thing: permanent neutrality. And they got it. From that point forward, Switzerland was not to be invaded, drafted, or drawn into foreign wars. This agreement, signed by the great powers of Europe, protected the Swiss in a way geography never could, and it came with unexpected benefits. Wealthy Europeans, fearing war in their own countries, started moving their money to Swiss banks that since the 1700s had operated under strict secrecy. Now neutrality gave them a competitive edge. Switzerland became a safe, literally and figuratively. While Europe fought wars and carved out empires, Switzerland focused inward. They eliminated internal tariffs, adopted a single national currency, and guaranteed citizens freedom of movement. In a Europe still divided by local currencies and regional restrictions, the Swiss were a century ahead. Their economy modernized, their identity solidified. And in 1848, after a brief civil war, the Swiss Federation was born. It came with a new constitution, a national flag, and something even rarer: direct democracy. In Switzerland, the people don't just elect officials, they vote on the laws themselves. It made change slower, but more stable. It also made government spending harder, which meant lower taxes. This system kept the government in check and made the country more attractive to outside capital. Switzerland wasn't just neutral, it was now self-directed, decentralized and trusted. And the timing couldn't have been better, because the world was about to go to war again. By the early 1900s, Switzerland had something no one else in Europe did: a reputation for peace and privacy. Bank secrecy had been in place for generations, but in 1934 it became law. From that point on, revealing a client's identity became a federal crime. This wasn't just about protecting money, it was about creating a fortress, legal, political, and physical, and the timing was perfect. World War I had already shown what war could do to national currencies, assets, and economies. Switzerland's neutrality, combined with its strict secrecy laws, made it a magnet for foreign wealth. Swiss banks began offering numbered accounts. Clients were identified only by digits. Not even the bank's own employees knew the name behind the numbers. As war crept closer again, the money flooded in. German clients banked in Zurich, the French in Geneva, Italians in Lugano. And when World War II erupted, Switzerland stayed neutral. Again, but neutrality didn't mean innocence. The Swiss stored gold for Nazi Germany. Gold that in many cases had been looted from occupied territories and even from Jewish families. They lent money to Axis powers, and one account at UBS, Switzerland's largest bank, was held by Hitler himself. At the same time, Jewish families across Europe were secretly using Swiss banks to protect their assets, the last thing they had left. To avoid theft or seizure, many of these assets were transported to underground bunkers in the Alps, hidden inside militaries. Vaults carved into the mountain rock. The Swiss prepared for the worst. If Germany invaded, and many thought it would, the Swiss would retreat into the mountains and fight a guerrilla war. But the invasion never came. Germany calculated the cost. Mountains, resistance, no clear economic reward, and backed off. Switzerland emerged from World War II untouched, its cities intact, its infrastructure preserved, its banks stronger than ever. And while the rest of Europe began rebuilding from ruins, Switzerland looked like a lifeboat, a place untouched by bombs, betrayal, or collapse, a place where money survived. After the war, the world changed. Nations came together, hoping to prevent another global catastrophe. The United Nations was formed, then the European Union, NATO, trade blocs, alliances. But Switzerland stayed out. No European Union, no NATO, not even the United Nations. Until 2002. Why? Because neutrality wasn't just policy anymore, it was identity. Joining meant taking sides, following rules set by others. And the Swiss had built an entire economy around not doing that. Meanwhile, the world's rich were taking notice. Swiss banks now managed billions in assets from France, Germany, Italy, and increasingly from the Middle East. Saudi oil wealth began flowing into Zurich and Geneva. Oligarchs, tycoons, political elites, all choosing Switzerland for the same reason. Stability, even with negative interest rates, where depositors paid the bank to hold their money. They still came because the Swiss didn't gamble, they didn't chase profits at any cost. They protected British and American banks were shifting focus, taking bigger risks, seeking bigger returns. But with that came volatility, bank runs, bailouts, crashes. In contrast, Switzerland was boring, and that's exactly what the wealthy wanted. By the 21st century, Swiss banks managed $2.4 trillion in foreign wealth, more than the country's entire GDP, more than any other country on earth. And they weren't just banks anymore, they were vaults, refugees, trust machines. Switzerland didn't just protect wealth, it created it. While the banks drew in capital, the country invested in something else. Precision. Swiss manufacturing focused on things the world couldn't afford to get wrong. Watches, optics, pharmaceuticals. High quality, high trust, high margin products. Swiss companies became global leaders not by being cheap, but by being perfect. They invented aluminum foil, Velcro, the electric toothbrush. They built a reputation not just for secrecy, but for reliability. And when it came to infrastructure, Switzerland built something rare in Europe, a train system that was clean, fast, and almost always on time. The trains weren't just for tourists. They connected rural areas to cities and cities to borders. They moved goods, commuters, and visitors with clockwork efficiency. Tourism became a pillar. The Alps weren't just a defense. They became a destination. Over 4 million visitors a year came for the landscapes, the air, and the quiet. Switzerland also maintained one of the lowest crime rates in Europe, low unemployment, high wages, and a strong currency that stayed stable even when global markets shook. Behind all of this was a culture shaped by direct democracy. Every major change had to be voted on by the people. This slowed down politics, but made them more stable. The result? A country that seemed to operate on a different timeline, slower, more careful, but with fewer crashes. Where others chased power, Switzerland chose restraint. Where others expanded, it protected. And while much of the world moved fast, Switzerland moved with intention. No empire, no colonies, no natural resources to export, just mountains. And a decision, to be different. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't luck. It was design. Neutrality became a currency. Trust became an asset. And together, they built something that seemed impossible, a global financial fortress. With no walls, Switzerland isn't perfect. Its history is complex, its banks have faced scrutiny, its politics can be slow. But in a world built on risk, Switzerland proved that stability is its own kind of power. And, just like every storm needs a safe harbor, every age of chaos creates demand for a lifeboat. Switzerland became that lifeboat, and for over 200 years, it has stayed afloat, while empires sank. And just like every empire built on expansion eventually collapses, a nation built on restraint endures. If you found this story insightful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more content like this. Thanks for watching.